The transport ship Dominion's Fist shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace above the mining planet Kepler 4M42b. Commander Vextar, a towering Zephyrian with 4 arms and crystalline skin, stood before the massive viewport watching the brown and gray world spin slowly below. His secondary arms worked the control panels while his primary ones remained clasped behind his back. "Another pathetic human colony," he muttered, his voice carrying the mechanical undertone common to his species. How these soft creatures managed to spread across 3 systems still baffles the High Command. Lieutenant Kesseral, a sleek Felonian with midnight blue fur and yellow eyes, approached with a data pad. "Sir, orbital scans confirm the settlement. Population approximately 2,000 humans. No significant defensive capabilities detected. Standard mining equipment only." Vextar's 4 eyes glowed brighter, a sign of satisfaction among his kind. "Perfect. The Empire requires this planet's rare Earth deposits. Begin the evacuation protocol. Standard procedure. Give them 72 hours to gather personal belongings and board the relocation vessels." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. The Galactic Empire had performed this operation countless times across dozens of worlds. Humans, with their short lifespans and fragile bodies, rarely put up meaningful resistance. They were considered barely above the primitive species classification, useful only for manual labor in the Empire's vast mining operations. As the Dominion's Fist entered the planet's atmosphere, Vextar reviewed the intelligence reports. The colony had been established only 15 years ago by Earth refugees seeking to escape the overcrowded inner systems. They had no military, no advanced technology, no political connections, just farmers, miners, and their families trying to build a simple life on a world that barely supported human habitation. The ship landed with a thunderous roar in the center of New Eden, the colony's only significant settlement. Dust and debris scattered as the massive vessel's engines powered down. Through the viewport, Vextar could see humans emerging from their crude shelters, metal prefabs and converted shipping containers that served as homes. "Deploy the announcement drones," he ordered. "Begin standard relocation protocols." Within minutes, the Empire's translation drones hovered above the settlement, broadcasting the evacuation order in perfect English. The humans below looked up with expressions of shock, fear, and desperation. Some fell to their knees. Others gathered their children close. A few angry voices shouted defiance, but they were quickly hushed by more sensible neighbors. Vextar had seen it all before. The pattern was always the same. Initial shock, then desperate bargaining, finally resigned acceptance. Humans were nothing if not predictable in their weakness. The boarding ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, and Vextar led a squad of enforcement units down into the settlement. The Empire's soldiers were an intimidating sight. 8-foot-tall Chronakians in powered armor, their 6 arms each carrying different weapons. Behind them came the assessment teams, bureaucrats from various species tasked with cataloging human possessions and determining their value to the Empire. A small group of human leaders approached, led by an older man with gray hair and calloused hands. He walked with the slight limp common to humans who had spent decades in hard labor. "I'm Mayor Harrison," the man said, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "Please, Commander, this is our home. We've done nothing wrong. We have legal claims to this land, recognized by the Terran Colonial Authority." Vextar looked down at the human with the same expression he might reserve for an insect. "The Terran Colonial Authority has no jurisdiction here, human. This world now belongs to the Empire. You have 72 hours to prepare for relocation. You will be given new assignments and housing appropriate to your abilities." "Where will you take us?" asked a woman holding a young child. "The processing stations on Gamma Centauri," Vextar replied without emotion. "Your skills will be evaluated, and you will be assigned to mining operations, agricultural collectives, or service industries as needed." The humans exchanged frightened glances. They had all heard stories about the Empire's processing stations, massive facilities where displaced populations were sorted like cargo and sent to whatever corner of the galaxy needed cheap labor. Families were often separated. Many never saw their homeworlds again. As the enforcement units spread out to begin their preliminary inspection of the settlement, Vextar noticed something that struck him as odd. While most of the humans showed the expected signs of fear and desperation, there was one who seemed different, a young girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old by human standards, stood near the edge of the crowd. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wore the practical clothing common to frontier colonies: sturdy pants, work boots, and a jacket that had seen better days. But unlike the other humans, she wasn't crying or clinging to an adult. Instead, she watched the enforcement units with calm, analytical eyes. When one of the Chronakian soldiers approached her group, the adult stepped back instinctively. The girl remained exactly where she was, studying the 8-foot-tall armored figure with curious interest rather than fear. "Move along, small human," the soldier growled through his helmet's voice amplifier. The girl tilted her head slightly. "Your power armor is using a Mark 7 fusion cell configuration," she said in a clear, steady voice. "But you're running it at only 60% efficiency. The heat dispersal vents on your left shoulder are partially blocked." The Chronakian stopped. Enforcement units were not accustomed to humans, especially human children, commenting on their equipment. "What did you say?" "The vents," the girl repeated patiently. "Third and fifth vents from the top. There's debris buildup reducing airflow. It's causing your suit to run hot and drain power faster than normal." The soldier checked his suit's diagnostic readout. His primary weapon arm trembled slightly, a sign of surprise among his species. The human child was correct. His power levels were indeed lower than they should be, and his suit's temperature was running higher than optimal. "How could you possibly know that?" he demanded. The girl shrugged. "I can hear the frequency change in your fusion cell's harmonic resonance. When the cooling system is stressed, it creates a distinctive vibration pattern." By now, other soldiers and even some of the assessment team had taken notice of the conversation. Vextar himself approached, his 4 eyes focused intently on this unusual human child. "What is your name, young human?" he asked. "Sarah," the girl replied simply. "Sarah Chen. And how does a human child come to know about Imperial military technology?" Sarah looked up at the towering Zephyrian commander without flinching. "My dad taught me about lots of things. He said it was important to understand how machines work." "Your father is a technician?" Vextar asked, making a note on his datapad. Skilled technicians were valuable to the Empire, even human ones. "He was," Sarah said quietly. "He died 3 years ago. Mining accident." Vextar's interest waned immediately. A dead human technician was of no value to anyone. He was about to turn away when Sarah spoke again. "But before he was a miner, he used to fix starships." Something in the way she said it made Vextar pause. There was a weight to her words, as if they carried a significance beyond their surface meaning. Around them, the other humans had grown very quiet, watching the exchange with expressions that seemed almost afraid. "Many humans work on starships," Vextar said dismissively. "It is common labor," Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. But not everyone gets to work on ships like the Nightfall." The effect of that single word was immediate and dramatic. Every Imperial soldier within earshot stopped what they were doing. The assessment team members exchanged alarmed glances. Even Vextar felt his crystalline skin grow cold. The Nightfall was a legend in Imperial military circles. A ghost ship that had haunted the outer territories for over a decade, striking Imperial convoys and installations with surgical precision before vanishing into the void. The Empire had sent entire fleets to hunt it down, but the mysterious vessel always stayed one step ahead, as if its crew could predict every Imperial move. "That ship is a myth," Vextar said. But his voice lacked conviction. Sarah looked at him with those calm, steady eyes. "No, sir. It's not a myth. And my dad wasn't just any technician who worked on it." The silence stretched long and uncomfortable. Vextar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's thin atmosphere. In the distance, he could hear the low rumble of the Dominion's Fist's engines cooling down. But somehow that familiar sound now seemed ominous rather than reassuring. "What was your father's name?" he asked quietly. Sarah smiled for the first time since the Imperial ships had arrived. It was not the innocent smile of a child, but something far more unsettling. "Marcus Chen," she said, "but I think you might know him by a different name." Commander Vextar's 4 eyes remained fixed on the human child as silence settled over the settlement, like a heavy blanket. The name Marcus Chen meant nothing to him personally, but the reaction of his troops suggested otherwise. Several of the Chronakian enforcement units had actually taken a step backwards, their massive forms suddenly seeming less intimidating. "Lieutenant Kesral," Vextar called without taking his gaze off. "Sarah, run that name through Imperial intelligence databases immediately." The Felonian officer's ears flattened. Against her skull, a clear sign of distress among her species. Sir, perhaps we should return to the ship for this inquiry. Standard protocol suggests. Now, Lieutenant. Kesseral's claws extended involuntarily as she activated her portable data terminal. The device chirped and hummed as it connected to the Imperial Intelligence Network, cross-referencing the name against countless files of wanted criminals, enemy operatives, and persons of interest. While they waited, Vextar studied the human girl more carefully. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that seemed almost military in its precision. The other human colonists had moved away from her, forming a subtle circle of empty space as if they unconsciously recognized something dangerous about the child. "Tell me about your father," Vextar said, his voice taking on the deceptively casual tone he used during interrogations. Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "What would you like to know?" "Everything." "That would take a very long time," she replied with the matter-of-fact honesty that children often possessed. "He taught me about engines, navigation systems, weapons arrays, shield configurations, tactical analysis, and 17 different ways to disable an Imperial cruiser without destroying it completely." The last part was delivered in the same conversational tone she might use to discuss the weather. But it sent another ripple of unease through the Imperial forces. Vextar noticed that Sergeant Corax, the leader of his enforcement unit, had quietly activated his weapon systems. 17 ways? Vextar asked. 18, actually, but the last one requires access to the ship's computer core. And Dad said that was too dangerous to attempt unless it was absolutely necessary. Lieutenant Kesseral's terminal began beeping urgently. She looked at the display, and her yellow eyes grew wide with alarm. "Sir, I'm getting multiple classified flags on this search. The system is requesting authorization codes above my clearance level." "Use my command codes," Vextar ordered, though a growing sense of dread was building in his chest. As Kesseral input the authorization, one of the human colonists, an older woman who had been standing near the mayor, stepped forward nervously. "Excuse me," she said in a trembling voice. "I think there's something you should know about Sarah." Vextar's attention shifted to the woman. "Speak." "Her father, Marcus. He never talked much about his past. Said it was better forgotten, but sometimes late at night when he thought no one was listening, he would have nightmares. He'd call out in his sleep talking about ships and battles and..." She paused, swallowing hard. "And he'd mention the Empire. Not kindly." "Continue." 3 years ago, when the mining accident happened, it wasn't really an accident." The woman's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Marcus was in the deep tunnels when the support structure collapsed. But before he died, he managed to save 6 other miners who were trapped. The rescue team found him pinned under a massive support beam. But he'd somehow rigged an emergency force field generator to protect the others." Sarah's expression hadn't changed, but something in her eyes seemed to sharpen. "Mrs. Patterson, you don't need to tell them about that." "The thing is," the woman continued, ignoring Sarah's quiet words, "we never could figure out how he knew how to build that force field generator. It used components from our mining equipment, but configured in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The design was, well, it was Imperial tech, military grade." Kesseral's terminal suddenly erupted in a series of urgent alarms. The Felonian's fur stood on end as she read the information scrolling across her screen. "Commander," she said in a voice tight with fear, "you need to see this." Vextar strode over to examine the display, his crystalline skin beginning to shift color, a stress response among his people. What he saw there made his blood run cold. The file was heavily redacted, with large sections blacked out under the highest levels of Imperial security classification. But what remained was enough to paint a terrifying picture. Marcus Chen, human, former Imperial Navy technical specialist, defected 12 years ago following the Titan Station incident, wanted in connection with the theft of classified military technologies. Last known associates, crew of the vessel designated the Nightfall. Status, extremely dangerous. Approach with maximum caution. But it was the final entry that made Vextar's hands tremble as he read it. Suspected to be the individual known in rebel circles as the Ghost Engineer, architect of 17 documented attacks on Imperial installations, each utilizing stolen Imperial technology turned against its creators. "Impossible," Vextar whispered. "The Ghost Engineer is a myth. Intelligence reports suggested he was killed in the Rigel Nebula operation 5 years ago. The reports were wrong, Sarah said quietly. Her voice carried across the sudden silence with perfect clarity. Dad was very good at making people think he was dead when it was convenient. Every weapon on the Imperial soldiers suddenly turned toward the small human girl. She looked at the array of plasma rifles and particle cannons aimed at her without apparent concern. "You're saying your father was the ghost engineer?" Vextar demanded. "I'm saying my father was Marcus Chen," Sarah replied calmly. "What other people called him isn't really important." Sergeant Korak stepped forward, his massive Chronikian frame casting a shadow over the girl. "Commander, recommend immediate termination. The offspring of a known terrorist cannot be allowed to—" "Sergeant," Sarah interrupted, her voice still conversational but somehow carrying an undertone that made the 8-foot-tall warrior pause. "Your armor's targeting system is calibrated for adult human opponents. The crosshairs on your helmet display are currently aimed 3 inches above my head." Korax glanced at his heads-up display and cursed in his native language. The child was right again. "More importantly," Sarah continued, "your weapon's power cell is operating at 94% capacity. But the energy coupling between your rifle and your suit's main power supply has a 0.3% efficiency loss due to a loose connection in the secondary relay. At your current rate of power consumption, you'll be down to 89% capacity in approximately 4 minutes, which will trigger your suit's power conservation protocols and reduce your weapon's firing rate by 12%. The silence that followed this pronouncement was deafening. Imperial soldiers were trained to monitor their equipment constantly, but the level of detailed analysis the human child had just demonstrated was beyond anything they had encountered. "How are you doing that?" Kesseril asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shrugged. "Dad taught me to listen. He said that every machine has its own voice, and if you know how to hear it, it will tell you everything you need to know about its condition, its capabilities, and its weaknesses." Vextar's mind raced as he processed the implications. If this child had inherited even a fraction of her father's technical genius, she represented a significant threat to Imperial security. But if her father truly was the ghost engineer, then her knowledge might extend far beyond simple mechanical aptitude. "What else did your father teach you?" he asked carefully. "Many things," Sarah replied. "How to navigate by stellar cartography, how to identify Imperial ship classes by their engine signatures, how to calculate hyperspace jump coordinates without a navigation computer, how to recognize the weak points in Imperial defensive formations." Each revelation hit the Imperial forces like a physical blow. This wasn't just a human child. This was a walking repository of military intelligence, trained by one of the Empire's most wanted fugitives. But most importantly, Sarah continued, her calm expression finally shifting into something that might have been a smile, "He taught me about patience. He said that sometimes the best strategy is to wait for your enemies to make a mistake before you act." Mayor Harrison, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward with a look of dawning horror on his face. "Sarah, you can't be serious. This is our home. These people are our neighbors." Sarah turned to look at the older man with something almost like pity in her eyes. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, these aren't people. They're an invasion force. And my father taught me that invasion forces only understand one language." The temperature in the settlement seemed to drop several degrees. Even the Empire's seasoned soldiers, veterans of countless campaigns against various species across the galaxy, felt a chill of genuine fear. "What language is that?" Vextar asked, though he wasn't certain he wanted to hear the answer. Sarah's smile widened, and for the first time since the Imperial ships had arrived, she looked exactly like what she was, a 10-year-old human child. Except for her eyes. Her eyes held depths that belonged to someone much older and infinitely more dangerous. "Superior firepower," she said simply, as if summoned. The shadow fell across New Eden settlement like the wings of some impossible predator. Above them, shimmering into visibility against the pale sky, was a ship unlike anything in the Imperial fleet databases. It was sleek where Imperial vessels were bulky, silent where they were thunderous, and carried an aura of lethal purpose that made the Dominion's fist look like a clumsy cargo hauler by comparison. Commander Vextar's 4 eyes tracked upward, his crystalline skin shifting through several colors as stress hormones flooded his system. The ship was beautiful in the way that perfectly designed weapons often were, every line and curve optimized for maximum efficiency and lethality. Nightfall, he whispered, the word carrying the weight of a curse. Sarah nodded approvingly. She's still the prettiest ship in the galaxy, she said with genuine pride. Dad always kept her in perfect condition. The Imperial forces stood frozen in a tableau of shock and growing terror. Every soldier, every officer, every bureaucrat had heard the stories. The Nightfall was more than just a ship. It was a legend that parents told to frighten disobedient children, and that military academies used as a case study in asymmetric warfare. For 12 years, this vessel had haunted the outer reaches of Imperial space like a ghost made of metal and malice. It had destroyed 3 Imperial battlecruisers, crippled 2 entire fleets, and stolen enough classified technology to arm a dozen rebel movements. The ship's crew were phantoms who struck without warning and vanished without trace, leaving behind only wreckage and the growing legend of their invincibility. And now it hung in the sky above them, close enough that they could see the scorch marks on its hull from countless battles. Lieutenant Kesral's terminal was screaming with proximity alarms and threat assessments. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the flood of tactical data. "Commander," she said in a voice tight with panic, "our weapon systems can't get a target lock. The ship's hull is reflecting our sensor sweeps like it's not really there." "Adaptive metamaterial armor," Sarah explained helpfully. "Dad designed it himself. The hull surface can mimic the electromagnetic properties of whatever environment the ship is in. To your sensors, the Nightfall looks exactly like empty space." Sergeant Korax, despite his terror, maintained enough military discipline to keep his weapon trained on the girl. "Commander, we need to eliminate the target and withdraw immediately. Every second we remain here increases the danger to—" "Sergeant," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying a note of gentle correction. "You might want to look up." Every head turned skyward as a new sound filled the air, the distinctive whine of charging energy weapons. Along the Nightfall's sleek hull, previously invisible weapon ports were sliding open with mechanical precision. The ship's armament revealed itself like a predator baring its teeth. Plasma cannons that could vaporize a building, particle beam arrays capable of cutting through tank armor, and missile launchers loaded with ordnance that could level city blocks. But it was the ship's main gun that made Commander Vextar's blood freeze in his veins. The massive weapon system extending from the vessel's prow was unmistakably Imperial in design. A Mark IX Devastator cannon, the kind of weapon system typically mounted on Imperial dreadnoughts. Somehow, impossibly, it had been integrated into the alien ship's hull with an elegance that made it seem like an organic part of the design. "That's a Class 7 Imperial Devastator," Vextar said in disbelief. "Those weapons are classified beyond top secret. How could they possibly—" "Dad liberated it from the Imperial Justice during the Battle of Proxima Station," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "The dreadnought was badly damaged and had to abandon several weapons systems. Dad thought it would be a shame to let such beautiful engineering go to waste." The implications of that casual statement hit the Imperial forces like a thunderbolt. The Battle of Proxima Station had been classified as a terrorist attack on Imperial infrastructure. 300 Imperial personnel had died when the station's power core was sabotaged and the facility destroyed. The Empire had spent years investigating the incident, never suspecting that the mysterious attackers had also managed to steal one of their most advanced weapon systems. "Impossible," Kesral whispered. "The power requirements alone. A ship that size couldn't possibly generate enough energy to fire a Devastator cannon." Sarah looked at the Felonian officer with the patient expression of a teacher correcting a slow student. "That's what everyone thought," she agreed. "But Dad figured out how to modify the ship's fusion core to operate in a cascade configuration. Instead of one reactor, the Nightfall has 7 smaller cores that can link together during combat operations. The combined output actually exceeds that of an Imperial dreadnought." The technical explanation was delivered with casual confidence, but the implications were staggering. If the human child was telling the truth, then the Nightfall wasn't just a rebel vessel. It was a technological marvel that surpassed Imperial engineering in several key areas. Commander Vexitar's mind raced through tactical options, but every scenario ended in disaster. His ship was powerful, but it was also designed for planetary bombardment and troop deployment, not ship-to-ship combat with a vessel that seemed specifically designed to kill Imperial warships. "What do they want?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Sarah smiled again, and this time there was nothing childlike about the expression. "They want you to leave," she said simply. "All of you. Right now, before Dad gets impatient. Your father is dead," Vextar said, grasping for any advantage. "You said so yourself. Mining accident 3 years ago." "I said he died in a mining accident," Sarah corrected. "I never said he stayed dead." The words sent a chill through the assembled Imperial forces that had nothing to do with the planet's thin atmosphere. Before anyone could respond, Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small communication device, a standard civilian model that looked completely harmless. "Hi, Dad," she said into the device, her voice suddenly taking on the tone of an ordinary child talking to her parent. "The Empire wants to take our home away." The response came through the device's speakers, clearly audible to everyone in the settlement. The voice was human, male, and carried the kind of calm authority that came from years of command experience. "Are they being unreasonable, sweetheart?" "Very unreasonable," Sarah replied, shooting a meaningful look at Commander Vexistar. "They have big guns and scary armor, and they think that makes them important." A sound came through the communicator that might have been laughter. "Well, we can't have that, can we? Put their commanding officer on the line." Sarah held out the device toward Vextar. "Dad wants to talk to you." The Zephyrian commander stared at the innocent-looking communicator as if it were a venomous snake. Every instinct screamed at him not to take it, but military protocol demanded that he at least attempt to negotiate before engaging in combat. With hands that trembled only slightly, he accepted the device. "This is Commander Vextar of the Imperial vessel Dominion's Fist," he said, his voice carrying all the authority he could muster. "You are in violation of Imperial territorial claims and harboring a known terrorist. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." The response was immediate and delivered in a tone of mild amusement. "Commander, I'm Marcus Chen. I believe you've been looking for me." Hearing the name spoken aloud, in the calm, confident voice of a man who should have been dead, sent waves of terror through the Imperial ranks. Several of the enforcement units actually took steps backward, their weapons wavering as they struggled to process the impossibility of the situation. "The Ghost Engineer," Vextar breathed. "Some people call me that," Marcus Chen replied. "Personally, I prefer Dad. Now, Commander, let me explain the situation clearly so there's no misunderstanding. You have brought an invasion force to threaten my daughter and the people she considers family. This makes me very unhappy." Vextar tried to maintain his composure. "This is an Imperial operation under proper authority. You have no legal standing to—" "Commander," Marcus interrupted, his voice still pleasant but carrying an undertone that made the Zephyrian's skin crawl. "Do you see the targeting laser currently painting your ship's engine compartment?" Vextar looked up and felt his heart skip a beat. A thin beam of red light was indeed focused on the Dominion's Fist, specifically targeting the vessel's primary fusion reactor housing. "That laser is being generated by a weapons system I personally designed and installed," Marcus continued. "It can deliver enough focused energy to trigger a cascading failure in your ship's power core. The resulting explosion would vaporize everything within a 3-kilometer radius, including the settlement and everyone in it." The threat was delivered with the same casual tone one might use to discuss the weather, but every Imperial soldier could hear the absolute certainty behind the words. "However," Marcus continued, "I'm not unreasonable. I'm going to give you exactly 10 minutes to load your people back onto your ship and leave this system. If you're still here after that deadline, I'll assume you've chosen to resist and I'll act accordingly." "You're bluffing," Vextar said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You wouldn't destroy an entire settlement just to kill Imperial forces." Sarah looked up at him with an expression of genuine. The shadow fell across New Eden settlement like the wings of some impossible predator. Above them, shimmering into visibility against the pale sky, was a ship unlike anything in the Imperial fleet databases. It was sleek where Imperial vessels were bulky, silent where they were thunderous, and carried an aura of lethal purpose that made the Dominion's Fist look like a clumsy cargo hauler by comparison. Commander Vextar's 4 eyes tracked upward, his crystalline skin shifting through several colors as stress hormones flooded his system. The ship was beautiful in the way that perfectly designed weapons often were, every line and curve optimized for maximum efficiency and lethality. "Nightfall," he whispered, the word carrying the weight of a curse. Sarah nodded approvingly. "She's still the prettiest ship in the galaxy," she said with genuine pride. Dad always kept her in perfect condition. The Imperial forces stood frozen in a tableau of shock and growing terror. Every soldier, every officer, every bureaucrat had heard the stories. The Nightfall was more than just a ship. It was a legend that parents told to frighten disobedient children and that military academies used as a case study in asymmetric warfare. For 12 years, this vessel had haunted the outer reaches of Imperial space like a ghost made of metal and malice. It had destroyed 3 Imperial battlecruisers, crippled 2 entire fleets, and stolen enough classified technology to arm a dozen rebel movements. The ship's crew were phantoms who struck without warning and vanished without trace, leaving behind only wreckage and the growing legend of their invincibility. And now it hung in the sky above them, close enough that they could see the scorch marks on its hull from countless battles. Lieutenant Kisseral's terminal was screaming with proximity alarms and threat assessments. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the flood of tactical data. "Commander," she said in a voice tight with panic, "our weapon systems can't get a target lock. The ship's hull is reflecting our sensor sweeps like it's not really there." "Adaptive metamaterial armor," Sarah explained helpfully. "Dad designed it himself. The hull surface can mimic the electromagnetic properties of whatever environment the ship is in. To your sensors, the Nightfall looks exactly like empty space." Sergeant Korax, despite his terror, maintained enough military discipline to keep his weapon trained on the girl. "Commander, we need to eliminate the target and withdraw immediately. Every second we remain here increases the danger to—" "Sergeant," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying a note of gentle correction. "You might want to look up." Every head turned skyward as a new sound filled the air, the distinctive whine of charging energy weapons. Along the Nightfall's sleek hull, previously invisible weapon ports were sliding open with mechanical precision. The ship's armament revealed itself like a predator baring its teeth: plasma cannons that could vaporize a building, particle beam arrays capable of cutting through tank armor, and missile launchers loaded with ordnance that could level city blocks. But it was the ship's main gun that made Commander Vextar's blood freeze in his veins. The massive weapon system extending from the vessel's prow was unmistakably Imperial in design, a Mark IX Devastator cannon, the kind of weapon system typically mounted on Imperial dreadnoughts. Somehow, impossibly, it had been integrated into the alien ship's hull with an elegance that made it seem like an organic part of the design. "That's a Class 7 Imperial Devastator," Vextar said in disbelief. "Those weapons are classified beyond top secret. How could they possibly—" "Dad liberated it from the Imperial Justice during the Battle of Proxima Station," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "The dreadnought was badly damaged and had to abandon several weapon systems. Dad thought it would be a shame to let such beautiful engineering go to waste." The implications of that casual statement hit the Imperial forces like a thunderbolt. The Battle of Proxima Station had been classified as a terrorist attack on Imperial infrastructure. 300 Imperial personnel had died when the station's power core was sabotaged and the facility destroyed. The Empire had spent years investigating the incident, never suspecting that the mysterious attackers had also managed to steal one of their most advanced weapon systems. "Impossible," Kesseral whispered. "The power requirements alone. A ship that size couldn't possibly generate enough energy to fire a Devastator cannon." Sarah looked at the Felonian officer with the patient expression of a teacher correcting a slow student. "That's what everyone thought," she agreed. But Dad figured out how to modify the ship's fusion core to operate in a cascade configuration. Instead of one reactor, the Nightfall has 7 smaller cores that can link together during combat operations. The combined output actually exceeds that of an Imperial dreadnought. The technical explanation was delivered with casual confidence, but the implications were staggering. If the human child was telling the truth, then the Nightfall wasn't just a rebel vessel. It was a technological marvel that surpassed Imperial engineering in several key areas. Commander Vextar's mind raced through tactical options, but every scenario ended in disaster. His ship was powerful, but it was also designed for planetary bombardment and troop deployment, not ship-to-ship combat with a vessel that seemed specifically designed to kill Imperial warships. "What do they want?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Sarah smiled again, and this time there was nothing childlike about the expression. "They want you to leave," she said simply. "All of you. Right now. Before Dad gets impatient." Your father is dead, Vextar said, grasping for any advantage. You said so yourself. Mining accident 3 years ago. I said he died in a mining accident, Sarah corrected. I never said he stayed dead. The word sent a chill through the assembled Imperial forces that had nothing to do with the planet's thin atmosphere. Before anyone could respond, Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small communication device. A standard civilian model that looked completely harmless. Hi, Dad? She said into the device, her voice suddenly taking on the tone of an ordinary child talking to her parent. The Empire wants to take our home away. The response came through the device's speakers, clearly audible to everyone in the settlement. The voice was human, male, and carried the kind of calm authority that came from years of command experience. Are they being unreasonable, sweetheart? Very unreasonable, Sarah replied, shooting a meaningful look at Commander Vextar. They have big guns and scary armor, and they think that makes them important. A sound came through the communicator that might have been laughter. Well, we can't have that, can we? Put their commanding officer on the line. Sarah held out the device toward Vextar. Dad wants to talk to you. The Zephyrian commander stared at the innocent-looking communicator as if it were a venomous snake. Every instinct screamed at him not to take it, but military protocol demanded that he at least attempt to negotiate before engaging in combat. With hands that trembled only slightly, he accepted the device. This is Commander Vextar of the Imperial vessel Dominion's Fist, he said, his voice carrying all the authority he could muster. You are in violation of Imperial territorial claims and harboring a known terrorist. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. The response was immediate and delivered in a tone of mild amusement. Commander, I'm Marcus Chen. I believe you've been looking for me. Hearing the name spoken aloud, in the calm, confident voice of a man who should have been dead, sent waves of terror through the Imperial ranks. Several of the enforcement units actually took steps backward, their weapons wavering as they struggled to process the impossibility of the situation. The ghost engineer, Vextar breathed. Some people call me that, Marcus Chen replied. Personally, I prefer Dad. Now, Commander, let me explain the situation clearly so there's no misunderstanding. You have brought an invasion force to threaten my daughter and the people she considers family. This makes me very unhappy. Vextar tried to maintain his composure. This is an Imperial operation under proper authority. You have no legal standing to, Commander, Marcus interrupted, his voice still pleasant but carrying an undertone that made the Zephyrian's skin crawl. Do you see the targeting laser currently painting your ship's engine compartment? Vextar looked up and felt his heart skip a beat. A thin beam of red light was indeed focused on the Dominion's Fist, specifically targeting the vessel's primary fusion reactor housing. That laser is being generated by a weapon system I personally designed and installed, Marcus continued. It can deliver enough focused energy to trigger a cascading failure in your ship's power core. The resulting explosion would vaporize everything within a 3-kilometer radius, including this settlement and everyone in it. The threat was delivered with the same casual tone one might use to discuss the weather, but every Imperial soldier could hear the absolute certainty behind the words. However, Marcus continued, I'm not unreasonable. I'm going to give you exactly 10 minutes to load your people back onto your ship and leave this system. If you're still here after that deadline, I'll assume you've chosen to resist and I'll act accordingly. You're bluffing, Vextar said, though his voice lacked conviction. You wouldn't destroy an entire settlement just to kill Imperial forces. Sarah looked up at him with an expression of genuine. Commander Vextar's mind reeled as he processed the impossible situation. Every tactical manual in the Imperial arsenal had chapters devoted to dealing with the nightfall, but every single strategy assumed the mysterious vessel would be encountered in deep space, not hovering directly overhead with a clear tactical advantage. 8 minutes. Marcus Chen's voice crackled through the communicator, calm and inexorable as a countdown timer. Vextar made a desperate decision. Lieutenant Kesseral, emergency transmission to Imperial Command. Priority Alpha. Request immediate support from the 7th Fleet. The Felonian officer's claws danced across her console, but after a moment she looked up with wide, terrified eyes. Sir, our communications array is not responding. All long-range transmissions are being jammed. Impossible. Our communication systems are hardened against... Dad's really good with electronics, Sarah interjected helpfully. He can make your equipment do pretty much whatever he wants it to do. Right now, your ship's computers think they're sending distress signals, but actually they're just broadcasting, The recipe for chocolate chip cookies. The casual revelation that their most secure military systems had been compromised without anyone noticing sent a chill through the Imperial forces. Sergeant Korak stepped closer to his commander, his massive Kranakian frame radiating barely controlled aggression. Sir, recommend immediate combat action. We cannot allow this terrorist to dictate terms to the Empire. Vextar looked up at the nightfall hanging in the sky like a sword of Damocles. The ship's weapons were still tracking his vessel with mechanical precision, and he could see additional systems coming online. Defensive screens shimmering into existence around the hull, point defense turrets swiveling to optimal firing positions. What are our tactical options? He asked quietly. Lieutenant Kesrel consulted her datapad with trembling hands. Sir, our primary armament consists of orbital bombardment cannons optimized for surface targets. Ship-to-ship combat capability is limited. Against a vessel of the Nightfall's specifications, our probability of victory is... She paused, running the calculations again as if hoping for a different result. 7%, she finished quietly. And if we attempt to withdraw? Unknown. The Nightfall's speed and maneuverability are classified beyond our security clearance. We have no reliable data on their pursuit capabilities. Sarah had been listening to this exchange with the polite attention of a child watching adults discuss something important. Now she spoke up again, her voice carrying that same unsettling mixture of innocence and ancient knowledge. Commander, she said, would you like to know why Dad chose this particular moment to reveal himself? Despite himself, Vextar found himself nodding. 3 days ago, your Empire issued a new directive regarding human colonies in the Outer Territories. Sarah continued. Executive Order 847 Alpha. Mass relocation of all human settlements to facilitate resource extraction. No exceptions, no appeals, no compensation. Vextar's crystalline skin shifted color again. Executive Order 847 Alpha was classified at the highest levels. There was no way a human child on a frontier world could possibly know about it. That order, Sarah said, her voice taking on a harder edge, affects approximately 2 million human beings across 47 star systems. Men, women, children, and elderly people who have spent their entire lives building homes on worlds that the Empire now wants to strip mine. Those are strategic decisions made for the greater good of the galaxy. Vextar replied automatically, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Whose greater good? Sarah asked. The question was delivered with devastating simplicity, and Vextar found he had no ready answer. Marcus Chen's voice came through the communicator again. 7 minutes, Commander. But perhaps I should give you some context for why I'm taking this so personally. I know who you are, Vextar said with more bravado than he felt. You're a terrorist and a murderer. Imperial records show that your attacks have resulted in... Imperial records show whatever the Empire wants them to show, Marcus interrupted. But let me tell you what really happened at Titan Station. The name sent another shockwave through the Imperial forces. Titan Station had been one of the Empire's premier research facilities, a massive installation where the galaxy's brightest minds worked on projects that would maintain Imperial technological superiority for generations to come. Titan Station was developing a new type of weapon, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone of barely controlled fury. A biological agent specifically designed to target human genetic markers. The plan was to deploy it across human space simultaneously, eliminating our entire species in a matter of weeks. Vextar felt his multiple hearts skip beats. The Titan Station project had indeed been classified beyond his security level, but rumors of its true purpose had circulated through certain military circles. You're lying, he said, but his conviction was weakening. I wish I were, Marcus replied. I was part of the engineering team that discovered what the research division was really working on. We found test subjects, Commander, human prisoners from your penal colonies, used as guinea pigs for a weapon designed to commit genocide on a galactic scale. Sarah's expression had grown sad as her father spoke. Dad tried to report it through proper channels first, she said quietly. He spent 6 months filing reports, requesting investigations, appealing to higher authorities. Know what happened? Vextar remained silent. They promoted the project director and ordered Dad to improve the weapon's efficiency, Sarah continued. That's when he decided the Empire wasn't worth serving anymore. So you destroyed the entire station, Vextar accused. 300 Imperial personnel died. 300 Imperial personnel who were willing participants in planned genocide, Marcus corrected. And yes, I destroyed the station, along with every sample of the bioweapon, every piece of research data, and every backup copy stored in Imperial archives. The communicator crackled with static for a moment, before Marcus continued. I also destroyed 12 other research facilities working on similar projects, crippled the Imperial fleet's ability to conduct deep space reconnaissance in human territories, and leaked enough classified information to ensure that every human colony in the galaxy knew exactly what the Empire had planned for them. Lieutenant Kesral looked up from her datapad with an expression of dawning horror. Sir, I'm reading historical files on the Titan Station incident. There are classified addenda to the official report, references to a project cleansing bioweapon development, and she stopped reading, her yellow eyes wide with shock. 6 minutes, Marcus announced. I think it's time you understood exactly who you're dealing with, Commander. The nightfall began to move, descending slowly toward the planet's surface with the fluid grace of a predator. As it approached, previously invisible details became apparent. The ship's hull was covered in scars, burn marks from energy weapons, impact craters from projectile rounds, and the distinctive scoring patterns left by plasma cannons. But it was the ship's size that truly drove home the impossibility of their situation. What had appeared to be a sleek frigate from a distance was revealed to be a massive vessel, nearly the size of an Imperial battlecruiser. The optical camouflage systems built into the hull had somehow made it appear smaller and less threatening than it actually was. Adaptive visual distortion, Sarah explained, noticing their shocked expressions. Dad calls it his perspective engine. The ship can manipulate how light reflects off its hull to create false impressions about its size, shape, and distance. Sergeant Korax raised his weapon toward the descending ship, but Sarah shook her head sadly. Sergeant, your plasma rifle has an effective range of approximately 800 meters against capital ship armor. The Nightfall is currently at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Even if you could hit it, your weapon would do about as much damage as throwing rocks. How does she know our weapon specifications? Korax demanded. Because, said a new voice from behind them. I taught her well. Every Imperial soldier spun around, weapons raised, but they found themselves facing empty air. Then, like a ghost materializing from nothing, a figure stepped out of what had appeared to be vacant space. Marcus Chen was not what Commander Vextar had expected. Instead of the scarred veteran or wild-eyed fanatic depicted in Imperial propaganda, he appeared to be an ordinary human in his early 40s. He was of average height and build, with brown hair showing the first touches of gray and wearing simple civilian clothing that would have allowed him to blend into any crowd. But his eyes held the same unsettling depth that Vextar had noticed in his daughter. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, learned too much, and remembered everything. Personal camouflage field, Marcus explained, noting their shocked expressions. Same principle as the ship's hull armor, just miniaturized. I've been standing here for the past 10 minutes listening to your conversation. Impossible, Vextar breathed. Our sensors would have detected. Your sensors detect exactly what I want them to detect, Marcus interrupted. Commander, you're operating under the assumption that Imperial technology represents the pinnacle of galactic engineering. That assumption is going to get you and your people killed. 3 hours after the Imperial forces had retreated to their ship, the Dominion's fist sat motionless in orbit around Kepler 442b, like a wounded beast licking its wounds. On the bridge, Commander Vextar stood before the main view screen, staring down at the planet that had become the site of his greatest military humiliation. Engineering report, he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. Chief Engineer Mordak, a barrel-chested Thraxian with 6 arms and a talent for understanding machines, looked up from his diagnostic console with frustration written across his alien features. Sir, the hyperdrive systems are completely locked down. Every time we attempt to bypass the diagnostic routines, new problems appear in the navigation core. The problems are fabricated? Sophisticated fabrications, sir. The computer genuinely believes there are critical malfunctions that require immediate attention. Whoever programmed these routines has an intimate understanding of Imperial engineering protocols. Lieutenant Kesseral approached with a datapad, her yellow eyes dim with exhaustion. Sir, I've completed the preliminary analysis of our encounter. The technological capabilities demonstrated by the human engineer exceed Imperial classifications in several key areas. Vextar accepted the report with hands that still trembled slightly. The data made for sobering reading. Remote systems infiltration, real-time weapons control, psychological warfare, adaptive camouflage technology. The list of capabilities went on for pages. Recommendations? He asked. Immediate evacuation of all Imperial personnel from the outer colonial territories. Kesseral replied without hesitation. If the human engineer has indeed established defensive networks across 47 systems, any further colonial operations will result in casualties we cannot afford. The High Command will never approve such a withdrawal, Vextar said, though privately he suspected she was right. With respect, sir, the High Command doesn't understand what we're facing. This isn't just one rogue human with stolen technology. This is evidence of a coordinated resistance movement that has had years to prepare and plan. Before Vextar could respond, the ship's communication array crackled to life. A familiar voice filled the bridge, calm, confident, and entirely too friendly. Commander Vextar, this is Marcus Chen. I hope your people are comfortable up there. Every bridge officer froze. The ghost engineer was somehow transmitting directly to their ship, despite all communication jamming protocols being active. What do you want? Vextar demanded. To talk, Marcus replied. I've been monitoring your repair efforts, and I thought you might appreciate some context for what you've experienced today. You mean your terrorist attack on Imperial forces? A sound that might have been laughter came through the speakers. Commander, let me ask you something. When Imperial forces arrived at this colony, what was your mission? Colonial relocation under Executive Order 847 Alpha, Vextar replied automatically. And what was the legal basis for that order? Vextar paused, realizing he was being led into a trap. The Empire's resource requirements supersede colonial territorial claims. I see. And did the Empire consult with the affected colonies before issuing this order? Consultation isn't required under Imperial colonial law. So, Marcus continued with devastating logic, the Empire decided unilaterally to forcibly relocate 2 million human beings from their homes to serve Imperial economic interests. Would you call that justice, Commander? Vextar felt his certainty wavering. When put in those terms, Executive Order 847 Alpha did sound less like legitimate governance and more like institutionalized oppression. The Empire brings order and prosperity to the galaxy, he said, reciting the standard response from military training. Whose prosperity? Marcus asked, the same question his daughter had posed hours earlier. Commander, in your military service, how many non-Imperial species have you seen benefit from Imperial prosperity? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Vextar found himself thinking of the countless worlds he had visited, the displaced populations, the strip-mined planets left barren and lifeless after Imperial resource extraction was complete. The Empire provides security and stability, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Security for whom? Stability for what? Marcus pressed. Commander, I want you to access your ship's historical database. Look up the Catharian Rebellion, the Siege of Altair Prime, and the Valentine Pacification. Tell me about the stability those populations experienced. Against his better judgment, Vextar found himself nodding to Lieutenant Kesseral, who reluctantly began accessing the requested files. What she found there made her ears flatten against her skull in distress. The Catharian Rebellion was a peaceful independence movement, she reported quietly. Imperial response resulted in 1.2 million civilian casualties. The Siege of Altair Prime, orbital bombardment of population centers, 800,000 dead. The Valentine Pacification. She stopped reading, her hands trembling. Go on, Marcus said gently. Tell your commander about Valentine. Complete sterilization of the planet's surface, Kesseral whispered. 4 billion inhabitants. No survivors. The silence that followed was deafening. Every officer on the bridge stared at their data screens, reading reports they had never been allowed to see during their military training. The Empire's version of history was quite different from the reality documented in classified files. I know this is difficult to process, Marcus continued, his voice carrying genuine sympathy. I went through the same realization 12 years ago, when I discovered what Titan Station was really designed to do. The Empire you serve isn't the benevolent guardian you were taught to believe in. Even if that's true, Vextar said desperately, Chaos and anarchy aren't the answer. Galactic civilization requires structure, leadership. I agree completely, Marcus replied, surprising him. But leadership should serve the LED, not the other way around. Commander, what if I told you there was a better way? What do you mean? I mean that the network of human colonies you encountered today represents something new. A model of interspecies cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than imperial domination. On the view screen, Vextar could see lights beginning to appear across the planet's surface as the settlement's residents emerged from their shelters. But there were more lights than there should have been. Far more. Sarah? Marcus called, and his daughter's voice joined the transmission. Hi, Commander, she said cheerfully. I thought you might want to see something interesting. The lights on the planet's surface began to move, forming patterns and configurations that gradually resolved into a message spelled out in letters large enough to be read from orbit. Welcome to the future. Those aren't just human colonists down there, Marcus explained. Over the past 3 years, this settlement has become a refuge for displaced populations from dozens of species. Catharians who survived your people's pacification, Valentines who escaped the sterilization of their homeworld, Altarians whose families were killed during the siege. The implications were staggering. If Marcus Chen had been gathering refugees from Imperial operations across the galaxy, then the situation was far more complex than a simple human rebellion. They're all here, Sarah added helpfully, because Dad promised them something the Empire never did, a place where they could live without fear. Lieutenant Kesseral looked up from her datapad with wonder in her yellow eyes. Sir, I'm detecting settlement structures consistent with Catharian architecture, Valentine agricultural systems, and Altarian energy distribution networks. The colony it's a genuinely integrated multi-species community. The first of many, Marcus said. Commander, your empire rules through fear and force, but we're building something based on hope and cooperation. Which do you think will prove more durable in the long run? Vextar stared at the planet below, watching as the lights continued to shift and dance in celebration of what appeared to be their victory over Imperial forces. For the first time in his military career, he found himself questioning not just his orders but the entire system he had sworn to serve. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you return to Imperial space and deliver a message, Marcus replied. Tell your superiors that the age of Imperial expansion is over. Tell them that the outer territories are under the protection of people who remember what the Empire has done and are prepared to ensure it never happens again. They'll send fleets, Vextar warned. Entire battle groups. They won't accept this challenge to Imperial authority. I'm counting on it, Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that sent chills down Vextar's crystalline spine. Commander, your empire has grown complacent. You've forgotten that the most dangerous opponent is one who has nothing left to lose. And if they refuse to listen, then they'll learn why the Nightfall is called a ghost ship, Marcus replied. Sarah, would you like to explain Project Phantom to the commander? The young girl's voice took on the tone of someone delivering a technical briefing. Project Phantom is a distributed network of modified Imperial vessels operating under automated control systems that Dad designed. Currently, there are 37 ships in the fleet, all equipped with adaptive camouflage and advanced weaponry. Vextar felt his multiple hearts stop beating. 37 ships? 38 actually, Sarah corrected. The Retribution. 6 weeks later, Commander Vexitar stood before the Grand Assembly of the Imperial High Command on the capital world of Centauri Prime. The massive chamber stretched before him like a cathedral of power, its walls lined with representatives from every species that served the Empire. Above them all, the 5 Supreme Admirals sat in judgment, their ancient forms wreathed in the ceremonial robes of ultimate authority. The debriefing had been going on for 3 hours, and Vextar could feel the growing tension in the room as he described the encounter on Kepler 442b. With each revelation about Marcus Chen's capabilities, the assembled officers grew more restless, more incredulous, more angry. You expect us to believe, Supreme Admiral Krathovan said, his cybernetic voice echoing through the chamber, that a single human engineer has created a fleet of invisible ships capable of defeating Imperial forces? Not a single engineer, sir, Vextar corrected carefully. A network of species working together under his coordination. And not just invisible ships, an entire infrastructure designed specifically to counter Imperial tactics and technology. The Supreme Admiral's mechanical eye focused on Vextar with laser intensity. And you chose to retreat rather than engage this threat? Sir, engagement would have resulted in the total destruction of my ship and crew with no tactical advantage gained. The Ghost engineer demonstrated technological capabilities that exceed our current defensive and offensive systems. A murmur of discontent rippled through the assembled officers. The idea that Imperial technology could be surpassed by a coalition of refugees and rebels was deeply disturbing to those who had built their careers on the assumption of Imperial superiority. Supreme Admiral Veltara, her crystalline form pulsing with controlled energy, leaned forward. Commander, you mentioned that this Marcus Chen provided you with historical documents regarding Imperial operations. Documents that allegedly contradict official records. Yes, sir. Files detailing civilian casualties, forced relocations, and planetary sterilization operations that were classified beyond my security clearance. And you believed these fabricated documents? Vextar hesitated. In the week since his return, he had spent countless hours reviewing the files Marcus Chen had shown them, cross-referencing them with other sources, analyzing their authenticity, trying to find evidence of forgery or manipulation. What he had found instead was a consistent pattern of cover-ups, edited reports, and carefully omitted details that painted a very different picture of Imperial history. Sir, I believe the documents were authentic. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Officers shouted questions and accusations while the Supreme Admirals called for order. Through it all, Vextar stood at attention, waiting for the storm to pass. When silence finally returned, Supreme Admiral Krathven spoke again. Commander, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into your fitness for command. Your claims of Imperial misconduct will be thoroughly reviewed. Sir, Vextar said quietly, there's something else you need to know. What? The phantom fleet that Marcus Chen described. It's real. Over the past 6 weeks, 37 Imperial installations in the Outer Territories have experienced simultaneous systems failures. No casualties, but complete infrastructure shutdowns that have effectively ended Imperial presence in those regions. The implications of that statement sent a chill through the chamber. If an invisible fleet was systematically dismantling Imperial infrastructure, then the threat was far more immediate than anyone had realized. Impossible, Admiral Veltara declared. Our sensor networks would have detected such a coordinated attack. Would they? Vextar asked. Admiral, how many times in the past month have you received reports of technical malfunctions from Outer Rim facilities? System failures, communication blackouts, equipment shutdowns that engineering teams couldn't explain. The silence that followed was answer enough. Every officer in the chamber had seen such reports, but they had been dismissed as routine maintenance issues, rather than evidence of coordinated sabotage. Lieutenant Kesserall, who had been standing silently beside her former commander, stepped forward. Sir, request permission to present additional intelligence. Supreme Admiral Krathven nodded curtly. The Felonian officer activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed a three-dimensional map of Imperial space, with Outer Rim territories marked in red. This represents the current status of Imperial installations in the colonial regions, she said. Red markers indicate facilities that have experienced technical failures in the past 6 weeks. As you can see, the pattern forms a complete defensive perimeter around the outer territories. The map was damning in its clarity. What had appeared to be random equipment failures was revealed to be a carefully orchestrated campaign that had effectively created a buffer zone between Imperial space and the rebel territories. Furthermore, Kesserall continued, communication intercepts suggest that news of the Kepler 442b incident has spread throughout the outer colonies. Human settlements are reporting visits from technical specialists offering defensive upgrades. Non-human refugee populations are requesting relocation to protected territories. You're describing a general uprising, Admiral Veltara said, her crystalline form dimming with concern. I'm describing a carefully planned liberation movement, Kesserall corrected. One that has been years in preparation and appears to have anticipated Imperial responses at every level. Supreme Admiral Krathven stood, his cybernetic frame towering over the assembly. Recommendations for military response? Sir, Vextar said before anyone else could speak, I recommend negotiation rather than military action. The chamber fell silent. No Imperial officer had ever suggested negotiating with rebels. "Explain," Krathvin ordered. "Sir, Marcus Chen has demonstrated technological capabilities that match or exceed our own. His network includes refugees from multiple species who have personal reasons to oppose Imperial rule. He commands a fleet of unknown size equipped with stealth technology that renders our sensors useless. And most importantly, he has chosen not to target Imperial personnel directly." Vexitar paused, gathering his courage for what he was about to say. "Sir, he could have killed me and my entire crew on Kepler 442b. He chose not to. He could have destroyed the installations he attacked instead of simply disabling them. He chose not to. He's sending a message. Leave the outer territories alone and there will be no war." "And if we refuse?" Admiral Veltara asked. Vextar thought of Sarah Chen, a 10-year-old girl who could hack Imperial military systems with casual ease. He thought of Marcus Chen, standing calmly in front of an entire invasion force as if they posed no threat at all. He thought of the nightfall, hanging in the sky like a promise of retribution. "Then we'll face an opponent who knows our technology better than we do, who has had 12 years to prepare for this conflict, and who has nothing left to lose," he said quietly. "Sir, I've studied every major Imperial military campaign in our history. We've always won because we had superior technology and overwhelming force. Against Marcus Chen, we have neither advantage." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some officers called for immediate military response, fleets of dreadnoughts to crush the rebellion before it could spread. Others suggested economic sanctions, trade blockades, diplomatic pressure. A few quietly wondered if the rebels might have legitimate grievances that deserved consideration. In the end, it was Supreme Admiral Krathvin who made the decision that would shape the future of Imperial policy. "We will dispatch negotiators to the outer territories," he announced, "not to surrender to rebel demands, but to explore the possibility of alternative arrangements that might serve Imperial interest while addressing rebel concerns." It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but it represented something unprecedented in Imperial history, an acknowledgement that military force might not be the solution to every problem. As the assembly dispersed, Lieutenant Kesserel approached her former commander. "Sir, do you think it will work? Negotiation instead of conquest?" Vextar looked out through the chamber's massive windows at the sprawling capital city below. Centauri Prime was a testament to Imperial power. Gleaming towers reaching toward the stars, transportation networks that moved millions of beings with clockwork precision, the accumulated wealth and knowledge of 1,000 worlds. But for the first time in his military career, he found himself wondering what that power had cost. How many worlds had been stripped of resources to build this magnificence? How many species had been displaced to serve Imperial needs? How many people like Marcus Chen had tried to work within the system before deciding that resistance was their only option? "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know that the alternative is a war we might not win. And even if we did win, what would be the cost?" 3 months later, the first Imperial diplomatic mission arrived in the outer territories, where they were met not by warriors and weapons, but by representatives from dozens of species working together to build something new. The negotiations that followed would be difficult, sometimes painful, and often frustrating, but they would also be historic. On Kepler 442b, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of a new orbital station, watching Imperial and Rebel